Welcome to another edition of the Fieldhouse Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. I am here with Seth Davis. He is obviously the managing editor over at the Fieldhouse. I am a senior writer, and it was a wacky, wild, incredible week in college basketball, especially on Saturday, a little bit on Sunday as well. So we're going to get here. We're going to talk about what happened and where we are standing just about 3 weeks away from Selection Sunday. Or is it 2 weeks now? Am I losing my mind, Seth?
No, it's 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Don't rush me.
We need to keep seeing these teams because, you know, who our favorites are keep changing every single time out we see these teams. It's been like a talking point that there is not a great team in college basketball this season. I don't know that I agree with that, but I would say that there are few consistent teams in college basketball this season, and that has created a really fun dynamic as we head into March.
So the stat that I heard today is whatever the number is, 65 games lost by teams ranked in the top 10 of whatever poll is the most ever at this point in the season. So we're on pace to have the most losses by top 10 teams for what that's worth. I'm not sure what that's worth. I'm not one to buy that this is so much different than it's been in years past or even in distant years past. Jay Billis always has great information, sort of knocking down there's so much more parity now in college basketball than there used to be. But clearly there's certainly no dominant team or even dominant teams at the top. Everybody can lose. Mm-hmm. Although, we do seem to have a pretty strong top tier, Virginia, Michigan State, Villanova, maybe Xavier to a lesser extent. These are teams that have only lost 2 or 3 games this season. So a lot of really good teams, but certainly anybody can lose, that we know.
Yeah, I think that's been established at this point. And you mentioned 2 of those teams in that top tier, Villanova and Xavier, and I think that's where we want to start. Villanova goes into the Cintas Center and beats Xavier 95-79. That was Villanova's 10th win over Xavier in its last 11 games. Why does Jay Wright have Chris Mack's number so much?
I think Jay Wright's got everybody's number. So, it stands out because it's Chris Mack and Xavier, right. And they've been so good. It's like you'd think, and I think of those 10 wins that 7 or 8 of them have been by double digits. I mean, yeah. It's really, they're 10-1 and it hasn't even been that close.
And the crazy thing about that is, like, you look at Xavier's last 3 years. I mean, you got an Elite 8, you got a Sweet 16, and maybe another Sweet 16 in there. Or no. It was the year where they were really, really good and lost in the second round in like an upset as a 2 seed. So this has been an incredibly good run for Xavier. It's just that Villanova has kind of had them for some reason.
Yeah, and I think that Elite 8 was they were an 11 seed. So when they upset Arizona, but I'll tell you a couple things that were just unbelievably impressive about Villanova. First of all, obviously the game being on the road. They won in Philly by 24 points. You would expect Xavier's going to be, just absolutely amped up, ready to play their best game of the season.
Yep.
And I do think Xavier's a pretty good team. But to me, the most impressive thing is that they basically beat them twice inside the same game because they opened up a huge lead on them. I think they got it to like 15, maybe 17 late first half. And then early second half, Xavier came out and, blew it, hit a couple of shots, and they cut it down to 3. I think it was 62-59, and then Villanova made a second push to go away and kind of won it going away. And it's funny if you look through all the Big East, we think of it as this rugged, physical, defensive-oriented league. The defensive numbers in this league are actually pretty bad.
Yep.
Villanova's 46 in the country, I want to say, in defensive efficiency. I have it right in front of me. They're 42nd. Yeah. So, these are not, but, Villanova was just pouring in those 3-point shots. Jalen Brunson didn't shoot it well, but he ended up with 8 assists and no turnovers. He might be the best post scorer in the country from the point. That's not saying a whole lot, obviously, but from the point guard position. And they just, they made shots. And it scares you a little bit because that whole live by the 3, die by the 3, and you're worried about them getting into the tournament and all that. But just the mental toughness, the chemistry, the character, the culture, the connectedness, the 5 C's as I call them, commitment. They're just a really, really good basketball team. And doing it without a very important piece in Phil Booth, who's another versatile wing scorer, probably their best perimeter defender as well, maybe him and Bridges. So, gosh, I mean, you know, it's hard to pick there's not going to be a clear favorite in the NCAA tournament, but it's Villanova. That's a very, like I said, they basically went on the road against a good team that had all the incentive to get revenge from what happened last time, and they beat them twice without one of their most important players. I mean, how much more of an impressive day can you have?
So, yeah, no, I think that it's really interesting to kind of bring up just how Villanova is doing this now, right? Dante DiVincenzo had 21, and he was a big part of that second push you mentioned late in the game against Xavier. He dropped 30 against Butler last weekend, too. He's really coming into his own in a way that I think a lot of people expected coming into the year, but 21, 30, maybe even to a higher level than what could have been possibly expected from him coming into the year. And it just gives them another option on the perimeter because Mikal Bridges obviously was incredible in that game. He had the great first half where I think he had 4 threes. Jalen Brunson had, I guess by Jalen Brunson standards, kind of a bad game. Like he had 8 assists and 0 turnovers, but it wasn't the vintage Jalen Brunson that we've been used to and accustomed to so often this season. So I'm just going to be very interested to see where they go from here and how they incorporate Phil Booth back. I think he is probably going to play on Wednesday from what the reporting is out there. So we'll see where they go. What does this mean for Xavier, though, going forward, do you think?
Well, first of all, let's point out that Colin Gillespie and Jermaine Samuels have gotten minutes for Villanova with Booth out, which is only
Great
enhancing
point.
their perimeter depth. So that's a frightening thought. I mean, look, I still think Xavier's a really good team. I love, one of the first things that I look for the tournament and why I think they've done well in the tournament the last couple of years is a bucket getter. And they have that in Trevon Blewett. This is someone who late game, late shot clock, everything's going wrong, nothing's going right, every play being called, and you just tell a guy, go get me one. And there aren't a lot of players in the country who can really do that on a consistent basis. And he does it at 6'5", and their whole perimeter, he's 6'6", Makura is 6'5", and Quentin Gooden is 6'4", and then they can play through the post a little bit. So, but it's funny because they have played a lot of close games. I think they were like 9-1 or something like that in games that were decided by 5 points or fewer.
Yep.
And quite a few of those were against not so good teams. I think they beat Georgetown in overtime, and they had that game against East Tennessee State. So they kind of play up and down to their competition a little bit. Yet here they are. They're basically a number 1 seed or a 2 seed at worst, and no one is talking about them as a potential national champion. I mean, they're on the 1 line right now. Maybe they go down to the 2 because of the loss, but probably not.
I don't
They're
think
probably
so.
still on the 1 line. Is anyone saying, well, I think Xavier can win a championship? So a little tough to figure out, but I thought they would not only win, I thought that Villanova was going to be walking into a buzzsaw. So my predictions are wrong like once a decade or so. So I think that was the one that I got wrong.
Yeah, I think that Xavier is going to be an interesting case of the resume versus the analytics disagreeing in a lot of ways, right? Because I agree with you. Based on what they have accomplished in terms of their body of work, they're an unquestionable 1 seed, I think, right now, sitting at 24-4, wins over Baylor, who looks awesome now, Cincinnati, Marquette, Butler, Butler again, Creighton, Seton Hall. These are all likely tournament teams. They've taken care of business in a pretty significant way. The question is just going to be, can they tie together stops against good teams consistently? That's been this particular core's question mark from the start of their sophomore year together in J.P. Makura and Trevon Blewett's case, right? This is just a team that really struggles on the defensive end in large part because of their 2 stars. Blewett and Makura are not great defenders. They play Karam Cantor quite a few minutes. He is not a great defender. So they need to find a way. Chris Mack needs to find a way, I think, to just string together stops. Maybe it's some more zone in the NCAA tournament than what we've seen so far. That's what he did last year to try and do that. It's going to be fascinating to see how he goes about doing it, though.
Well, again, why aren't they a better defensive team? It doesn't make sense to me. He's used that. I don't know if he's really used the 1-3-1 this season. If he's used it, I haven't seen it much. Maybe using some zone. I mean, you know me, I'm a zonophile. I love the zone. Because I don't think college basketball players know how to hit mid-range jumpers. So, to me, Again, I'm looking at their Ken Palm numbers right here. They're 70th in the country in defensive efficiency. You can't win a championship doing that.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you change your defense? I mean, it's mid-February. They're not going to learn how to play better man-to-man. I don't understand why Blewett and Bakura, they're such great scorers. To me, if you're a good enough athlete to get your shot and be able to score, especially at that size and that position, they should be better defenders. So it's just odd to me, that program, that culture, that coach, that personnel, that they're not better defensively.
Let's move on and talk about Duke. So I have a simple question for you. Is Duke back?
So I guess the question is Duke back to being back? We're gone, now they're back. Are they back from being back and now they're back?
Yeah, right.
I can tell you, Grayson Allen sure seems to be back. And for some odd reason, he cannot coexist with Marvin Bagley. It's the darndest thing. I think it's a totally mental thing, although some of it is technical in that Marvin Bagley takes up a lot of space. But then again, Marvin Bagley does have the ability to play in space and play from behind the three-point line. So I don't know why that is. I mean, if anybody should be able to figure out how to create space, it would be Coach K. But, Duke's offense is most effective when Bagley and Wendell Carter are down in the paint. And, at the start of the season, Krzyzewski wanted to make Grayson Allen more of a shooter than a driver because he was hurt so much last year with his kamikaze drives. Because unfortunately, it's Grayson Allen. Like, he can't be a driver and drive safely. It's like he's got to leap at the rim and crash to the ground. And meanwhile, he's a very good shooter who hasn't shot it well. He was in like the mid to low 20% in ACC games for a while.
Yeah.
And so now they lose Bagley these last 3 games, and he's just balling. And if you remember, Sam, back in Chicago in the Champions Classic when they played Michigan State, Bagley left the game early because he got poked in the eye, and Grayson Allen went for 37. And you thought he was going to be like Player of the Year guy. And it's been a real problem for Duke. Now, like I said on Twitter, and I'll stand by this, like, if you think Duke is better without Marvin Bagley, then you should never express your opinion about anything. So don't tell me that Duke is better without Marvin Bagley, but you can tell me that Grayson Allen plays better when he's not there. But certainly, if Duke is going to be able to reach its potential, they're going to have to be firing on all cylinders. And by the way, to me, the biggest thing about Duke right now is they have committed 100%. I don't know. I watched pretty much the whole game today, Sam. I don't know that they played a single possession of man-to-man. Now think about that. Yeah. Not a possession. And I've been calling for this all year. Like, they're a young team. They're really big. They're really long. So they should be able to execute the zone well. They're having problem learning the sophisticated nuances of team man-to-man defense because none of them have ever been asked to play defense for 5 seconds before they got to Duke. And they have a short bench. So why wouldn't they? And I think it's taken Coach K a while to come around to this, but he's said this is going to be their primary defense moving forward. So I don't know how serious Bagley's injury is. I mean, he's been out for 3 games. That's not a good thing. So you start to wonder, how long is he going to be out? But assuming he comes back and he's healthy again, and if they can work this thing out between Bagley and Grayson Allen and be fully committed to the zone, I mean, they may have something here. Remember, that was a close game against Virginia. They lost. It's not like they got blown out. Of course, they were at home, but they win that game, and it's a whole different vibe around that program. So, to go into Clemson and win on the road without Marvin Bagley, that's pretty impressive.
So, I don't really have a great feel for what to think of this Duke team going forward because I agree with you. For some weird reason, Grayson Allen, I don't know if it's just because there is more space on the floor when Marvin Bagley isn't there because Marvin wants to take up those driving lanes that Grayson Allen does as well, or if maybe it is a mental thing where he just locks in a more substantial way for some reason. I'm pretty unclear on why the effect would be there, but it clearly exists in some way. And I'm just going to be really interested to see how this continues once Bagley returns, because we know that Marvin is going to come back at some point, I think, right? Like, we should feel confident that if it's only a sprained knee, that it's going to be fine at some point. So that's probably the most interesting thing going forward to me. What does Duke look like with Marvin Bagley and Grayson Allen and at 100% going forward?
Well, it really shouldn't be a problem, but it is. Clearly it is. And I think a lot of it, frankly, has to do with Grayson Allen's personality. As you know, I did that, long story on him back in the fall and everything he's been through in his past. And what people don't seem to understand is that he's a pretty shy kid. The persona that he's known for out on the court is really not who he is. It's like this coat of armor that he puts on to be able to play basketball the way he needs to play it, and he has really struggled with that. And frankly, I just don't know that he's a natural leader. And on this team, when he's the only player with any kind of experience, they really need his leadership. They've really been missing that leadership from him. So listen, I mean, it's late February now. No one's changing who they are, but the pieces are there for them to get to San Antonio. And maybe this second experience for Grayson of playing this well when Bagley is out is going to be just the kind of jolt of confidence that he needs to be the leader this team needs him to be.
Let's go ahead and move on. We're going to talk about the Big 12 race now, as well as Oklahoma. Kansas picks up a big win against West Virginia, who, man, there is no circumstance where West Virginia should not have found a way to close out that game. Texas Tech ends up falling at Baylor. Just a last-second shot that goes awry. Where are we on the Big 12 race? Do we think that Kansas has a leg up now? It is officially a tie at the top, 10-4, both teams, 2 games clear of everyone else. Where are we sitting with 4 games left in this Big 12 race?
Well, there's a big X factor out there, and that is the health of Keenan Evans, who left that game against Baylor early second half and didn't return. And I haven't heard anything. Now, maybe by the time this posts, we'll know how long he's going to be out. Assuming he comes back, they get Kansas coming to Lubbock on Saturday, and that's going to be really one of the big games in college basketball this season. And if Keenan Evans is healthy, I would like Texas Tech to win that game. I would pick Texas Tech to win that game. If he's not only do you wonder about that game, but do you wonder, are they going to drop another game, somehow down the stretch here? Kansas, give Kansas credit for their mental toughness. I mean, they hung in there just like they did in that game in Morgantown. I think West Virginia helped them a lot with their atrocious half-court execution. You can talk about the free throw disparity all you want, but it was the same 3 officials who were working the game when you were up by 10 points with 3.5 minutes to go. So, no one likes to see 35-2 on the foul line, least of all Bob Huggins. But, West Virginia's a team, they foul a lot. They're 333rd in the country in defensive free throw rate, and they play that up-tempo style. So that's why they've blown a lot of really big leads. So it's pretty amazing, in a year where Kansas is clearly vulnerable, they lose Billy Preston, Silvio DeSouza is not nearly not the answer. He can't even step on the court. And yet here they are, still tied for first in the league in a year where everyone is talking about that the Big 12 is the best league in the country. So if someone's not going to knock off Kansas this year, when is it ever going to happen? Yeah, no,
I think that was a very interesting set of results to me, because it's hard for me to get over 35-2. I do understand the fact that Kansas was certainly more aggressive. They've also been very good at not fouling this year. Their 25% free throw rate against is 17th nationally. So not only does West Virginia foul, but Kansas is remarkably good at avoiding fouls. But it's hard to get past 35-2 from 2 teams that play physical defense like that, man. I will say, though, I don't think it came down to the free throw disparity. At the end of the day, this was West Virginia blowing a lead yet again in a game where it could not afford to blow a lead. Udoka Azubuike, at this point, we really just have to talk about how great he has been for Kansas. When he is on the floor, he does everything to stabilize that front court for Kansas. As long as he's out there, they're going to be okay in terms of just having enough size on the floor and having enough skilled size on the floor to produce. I do think that there are always going to be those worries in the front court just because they don't have the depth that they need. But on the other side of the token, I guess, as long as Azubuike's out there, I think they're going to be okay against the biggest teams in college basketball.
I mean, he's been a warrior. I mean, and they're not fouling is partly by design because they can't foul. They got no bench. So
absolutely,
I think coaching them like, hey, there's a way to. There are ways to defend without fouling. It's possible. I mean, look, I was keeping an eye on the game in the CBS Sports Network studio. I was not totally locked into it. I'm going to go back and at least watch the second half on my computer to get to burrow in, because you're right, 35-2. I mean, I've never seen it. It was only, by the way, the 7th largest free throw disparity in college basketball this season. So it's not like it's unprecedented, But clearly, if I just think honestly, Sam, fans, and that's what they do. Fans blame the refs for the loss because it's much easier that your team choked. And that's all they did. They choked it at Morgantown, they choked it at Allen Fieldhouse, and they choked the other games that they've blown big leads. It's just the nature of their style when it's effective and you're turning the other team over. I mean, Kansas had 8 turnovers. If you're West Virginia and the other team only has 8 turnovers, you're probably not going to win, because that's your lifeblood for your source for offense.
Going elsewhere in the Big 12, let's talk about Trae Young really quickly. Trae Young has another game where it wasn't necessarily up to the standard we saw earlier in the season. Oklahoma has now lost 8 of its previous 10 games. I mean, I don't think they're on the bubble yet. I don't do this bracketology thing as a job, so I shouldn't say that definitively, but man, they do not look like an NCAA tournament team right now.
Yeah, they're certainly failing every eye test. Now they have banked a little bit of money in terms of their resume, but they're going the other way real fast. And one of their best wins was over USC and LA. Really, their road win at Wichita State is the one that it's probably going to hold up the best. I mean, they've also beat Kansas and Texas Tech at home. I mean, they've got a pretty strong resume, and they only have 1 loss outside the top 100. So It's hard to see them not getting in the tournament. And there are no easy games the rest of the way, so they don't even have opportunities to have bad losses. But that aside, I mean, I tend to be a contrarian just to tick people off. So first of all, this whole National Player of the Year thing, it is Player of the Year, right? It's not Player of the Month, the February. It's Player of the Year, and over the course of the year, no one's been better than Trae Young. There's just no question about that. He has a chance to be the first player in college basketball history to lead the country in points and assists, and he's doing it in arguably the best league in the country. And, by the way, Brady Manick shoots 1 for 7 against Texas, 3 for 13 from the field, only gets to the foul line once. And unlike Trae Young, he's taking those shots without 3 people hanging all over him. So Trae Young is definitely forcing up a lot of shots. He's definitely committing a lot of turnovers. Still had 7 assists in that game. Sure. And then everyone said, well, Jalen Brunson should be. Well, Jalen Brunson goes 1 for 6 from 3 against Xavier and didn't even attempt a free throw. At least Trae Young got to the foul line 9 times and made all 9 shots. So those are separate conversations. The Player of the Year, I still think, should be Trae Young. It's a harder argument to make when the team is losing, and at a certain point, this team has to start winning. But they're not going to win if Christian James and Brady Manick and Odoms don't make shots when Trae Young gets in the ball. And they really, and I'll put this on Lon Kruger, who I think the world of from day one, and a lot of this is their youth. They have not been committed to defense at all. They are an atrocious defensive team. Certainly, Trae Young has no interest in playing defense. I mean, I don't think he has the energy right now. But just it is difficult to watch him struggle. His body language. He's obviously physically and mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
And he's struggling, and the team is struggling right along with him. It's pretty tough to watch, I got to say.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat you are on this one. Trae Young. They just don't have better options, I don't think. Brady Manick is a 6'9" freshman that was not expected to be playing this large of a role coming into the year for a NCAA tournament contender. Christian James isn't really consistent enough for me to play the role that he does. This is a team that does not have any other pros on it, and Trae Young led them out to a 14-2 mark to start the year, which was totally categorically ridiculous. I just don't think they have any better options. Trae Young, his frame, I think, is starting to betray him, as well as just his energy levels from having to take as many shots as he does, but I just don't think they have any other options there.
Is he still your National Player of the Year, or have you moved off?
No, he is. I think he's still the National Player of the Year. Now, if they drop all 4 of these games late in the season and end the season on a 9-game losing streak, we need to talk, I think, for sure. If they can't hold their home court against Kansas State and Iowa State late, we need to talk for sure. But for now, no. I'm totally with you on this. Trae Young for National Player of the Year still.
Okay, well, it's pretty late in the game now. There's not a lot of games left, so it'll be interesting to see what happens down the stretch.
All right, let's run through some other results really quickly. Michigan State ties the record for biggest comeback over the last decade with a 65-60 win over Northwestern. What is your takeaway from that game, I guess? Because on one hand, Michigan State got down 27 to a pretty bad Northwestern team. But on the other hand, they showed the resilience that you need to come back and take a tough one on the road in Evanston. Or is it in Chicago right now? I can't remember where exactly Northwestern is playing.
Chicago Allstate Arena. Honestly, Sam, my main takeaway is that it was so painful to watch Northwestern blow that lead, knowing what they've gone through and what a difficult season it's been. Really, I think you'd have to say the biggest disappointment of any team this season. And really, you got to put on that senior class. I mean, they had 3 made field goals in the second half. Let me repeat that. They had 3 made field goals in the second half. It was
11 points, right?
It was like painful watching that lead. And you just saw it happening, and you knew once the pendulum was swinging the other way, there was going to be absolutely nothing Northwestern could do about it. By the way, they were playing without Bryant McIntosh, who hurt his shoulder in the Rutgers game, so he didn't even play in that game. Listen, I mean, Michigan State is Michigan State. I mean, they and Purdue are the only 2 teams ranked in the top 10 in efficiency, both offense and defense, and they're the only team in that category that has 2 lottery picks. So they have 2 go-get-you guys, you know. And Jaren Jackson is a game changer on both ends of the floor, really. But, you know, I got to tell you, you know, when you look at their record, and, you know, someone wrote this on Twitter, and I went back and checked and looked at it. I got their record up in front of me right now. They beat Purdue, which is 4th on Pomeroy. Penn State is 28. Maryland is 41. They beat Maryland twice. Those are their only top 50 wins. Before that, you got to go back to November. Whereas Virginia, someone wrote on Twitter, was like, you know, had like 10 games against top 50 teams, and they were 9-1 in those games. So, the Big Ten has been really bad, you know, and so I don't know what to believe with Michigan State. I really don't. I mean, if you look at them, you'd say, well, they're the best team in the country, but based on the factors that I gave. But and by the way, that win over Purdue, it's not like they blew them out. They beat them by 3 points at home. So I don't know. I think maybe we're just going to have to wait till we get into the tournament. But the way they defend, the way they rebound, you know, their 2-point percentage is like off the charts. So those are the kind of things that travel and do well in the NCAA tournament. Because all of these sort of paper tigers that, you know, they love the 3-point shot, but they don't guard you. That doesn't work. And especially the second week of the tournament, you've got 2 games in 3 days against 2 really, really good basketball teams to get to the Final Four. If you don't defend and rebound, as Tom Izzo likes to say, blocking and tackling, you're not going to be able to make that happen. So you've got to like what they're doing right now.
It's a big week in the American Athletic Conference. Obviously, Cincinnati drops 2 games to Houston and Wichita State. Houston, I think you can argue, probably had a better week than anybody in America, beating Cincinnati and Temple on the road to, I think, really firm up an NCAA tournament bid. You look at them, they're sitting at 21-5 with wins over Arkansas, Cincinnati, Wichita State, a road win against Temple, a neutral win against Providence. They look really solid right now, and they've now entered the top 20 of the Ken Pom rankings. I mean, where are you with this American race now? Because you're looking at Cincinnati being a 12-2, up 1 game on both Wichita State and Houston, but Cincinnati hasn't really proven that it can beat good teams consistently.
Yeah, couple things. First of all, Houston's definitely in the tournament. I've got them ranked on my top 25 AP ballot this week.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and you know what? The win over Temple, to me, was more impressive than the win over Cincinnati. First of all, if for no other reason than it came 2 days after the win over Cincinnati. So that was a huge, definitely the biggest win they've had at Houston in a long, long time, certainly since Kelvin's been there. And that was a big-time win. You're talking about 2 days later having to go on the road and playing Temple, which is no fun. Temple is like lost to terrible teams, beat good teams all year. They can beat you, and they beat them by 21. So the Temple win, to me, demonstrates how good they really are. And, you know, they beat Cincinnati in a game where Rob Gray was shooting it terribly. He's not a great shooter anyway. So to me, they kind of play like Kelvin's old Oklahoma teams in that they just want to beat you up, grind you out. And they do have an alpha male in Rob Gray who, even when he's not shooting well, is going to do other things. He rebounds, he assists. So I'm real impressed with Houston. Wichita State is fascinating to me because here, their identity has always been predicated on their toughness, their defense. But they've gotten exposed a little bit in that going from the Missouri Valley to the American, they can't just physically dominate teams anymore. They've got to kind of play basketball. So defensively, they're really not that good. I mean, they had a wild game against Temple earlier in the week. They beat them 93-80. I mean, they gave up 86 points to Temple at home, and they were able to score 93. He's moved Austin Reeves into the starting lineup, who's not going to scare anybody defensively, but is a really good scorer. So he's kind of changed his DNA a little bit and his approach, which I give him credit for. That's probably not a great concession for him to have to make. Again, they're 75th nationally in defensive efficiency, but 8th in offense, and this is who they are. I think it's a good identity for them. I think it works, and it certainly worked at Cincinnati, which to me, I like Cincinnati. I like the way they play. I like teams who can score easily, and the whole grind you out, slow you down, guard you, offensive rebound you. One thing I love about Cincinnati is they're one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, but they are very hard to score against in transition because they're so good at getting back. So they crash the boards, but they still get back. That's impressive to me. But at some point, you got to get some easy baskets, and they really, Evans does it sometimes. Broom gives them a little bit off the bench, but they don't have a true point guard. They just don't look right to me on offense, and I think that really caught up with them against Wichita State because Wichita State can really score now, and so at a certain point, you got to be able to outscore your opponent. Cincinnati was not able to do that, so they definitely got exposed on that end this week.
Yeah, 2 quick notes here on Houston. I'm very excited for the first time that John Rothstein says so much Hollis Price and Rob Gray, just making that quick Kelvin Sampson connection.
Did you say that? Did you say that?
No, I am very excited because it is inevitable in the NCAA tournament.
All right, I'll tip them off.
Second, shout out to Devin Davis, who is now at Houston after having been dismissed from Indiana. Had a kind of rough go of it. He fell off of a car, if memory serves, and then got caught with marijuana. Ended up getting dismissed from the Tom Crean Indiana Hoosiers team and is now a significant piece of this Houston roster. Has been really, really solid for them. Has been, I think, over like 8 points over the course of each of his last 6 games. He's really probably their second or third best player on this roster. So shout out to Devin Davis for getting it back together and becoming a pretty critical piece of a Houston team that I think has a chance to make the Sweet 16. Finally, let's talk about Kentucky and talk real quickly about the SEC. Kentucky, everyone had written them off, it seemed like, for some odd reason that I was not entirely clear on. But Kentucky ends up beating Alabama and getting back on the right side of the ledger here. They're sitting at now 18-9. They have 4 tough games coming up, but as long as they can take care of their home court at Rupp Arena against Missouri and a Mississippi team that will be without Andy Kennedy now going forward, I can't see this team falling below like a 7 seed, right?
Well, I always thought the conversation about them not making the NCAA tournament was a little bit silly. Now, clearly, if they had lost out, then you'd have to take another look at it. But they still have some pretty good wins over the course of the season, especially beating Louisville. But listen, they lost 4 in a row and were extremely lucky to beat Vanderbilt at home in overtime, and otherwise it would have been 5 in a row. So there's certainly a lot of reason to question them, and I still question them. I just don't think they're that good. All kudos to them for beating Alabama. They rose to the occasion. I thought from the beginning that they would do well if they could build their team identity around their defense.
Yeah,
Calipari is a guy who does not like to play zone. He says it's because it does a disservice to his players in preparing them for the NBA.
I agree with that,
and I think there's definitely truth to that. But it's certainly I think hindered their ability to win games because again, I just think guys who a few months ago were at their senior prom and have never in their entire lives been asked to defend. Now you've got a team entirely full of freshmen, entirely full of inexperienced players, asking them to play high-level man-to-man defense in the SEC. It's hard. It's really hard. And the larger problem, Sam, and we've talked about this before, is they're just not that talented by Kentucky standards, particularly at the most important position, which is point guard. De'Aaron Fox you don't have to draw up a play for De'Aaron Fox. All you got to do is get a defensive rebound and get him in the open court, and you've got one way or another you're going to score. Tyler Ulis beforehand. I mean, they've always had a player like that. They just don't have that now. And they don't have really good shooters. They have a lot of size and terrific front court depth, so they're built for good defense and they're built for offensive rebounding. And they beat what I think is a really good Alabama team. So they're capable of beating a good team here and there. But to me, I've seen so many times over the years, Sam, I'm sure you have too, freshmen who make progress over the course of the year. Suddenly they get to the NCAA tournament and they're in a situation where if they lose that game, their season is over, and they're playing against a team that just doesn't care because they're an underdog or because they're a mid-major with older players, or they were well behind the Kentucky players in the rankings. All the mental things that we see happen in the tournament, and all of a sudden these freshmen are playing like it's November 10th again, and they're playing against Utah Valley, and they're lucky to win. So to me, Kentucky is not a team. We think about the 2014 team that went in as an 8 seed and ended up losing to UConn in the championship game. Like, sure. I just don't see that happening with this team. They just don't have that type of talent. And again, it's late February. They are who they are. They'll be in the tournament. They'll be around a 7 or 8 seed. Maybe they win a game, but the idea of them stringing together 3, 4, 5 games in a row, that is not going to happen.
Is there any other notable factor that you want to talk about here before we get out of here?
With Kentucky or just in general?
Just in general, anything that has happened over the course of the weekend.
Well, I'll tell you what, very quietly, Gonzaga, I think we talked about them last week.
I love this team.
Once again, when you watch, eventually Josh Perkins is going to get them beat. But their front court of Hachimura and Tilly and Jonathan Williams, and the way Zach Norvell is playing as a freshman, they got dudes now. Oh, yeah. And Nelson is a glue guy, who's a very good defender. Kispert is I think going to be a star for them in due time. Yeah. He's a freshman. Is Kispert not Gonzaga?
The most Gonzaga human being I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's 6'6". He plays all 5 positions, defends all 5 positions. He can shoot threes. He looks like a middle linebacker. And again, they're kind of coasting through the West Coast Conference, but I still maintain, even though St. Mary's lost to San Francisco, that's a pretty good team that Gonzaga went into their home gym and dominated them wire to wire. So, once again, they got BYU as their last game, but and that's on the road. That'll be an interesting test. But they're dominating their way through the West Coast Conference, and they're coming together at the right time and in a season when no one is talking about them because they lost early to St. Mary's and everybody kind of flushed them. But they look pretty good to me.
They're so athletic. Like, I think that's what people don't recognize about this team. Like, Killian Tilly is a ridiculous athlete for a kid coming out of France. Like, I can't remember the last time I saw a kid like that who came out of France who can guard anyone. Jonathan Williams, same deal. Crazy athlete. Rui, we know he's a crazy athlete. Zach Norvell is going to be able to maybe play in the NBA one day if he continues to iron out that efficiency as a scorer. Kispert's a great athlete. Melson and Perkins are both great athletes. These guys match up with opposing teams athletically in a way that, maybe you could have said in the past Gonzaga teams, maybe they're going to be able to match up athletically. Maybe we'll get them just because we have superior athletes. You don't have to worry about that anymore.
No, that's exactly true. And, they do. I pick on Perkins, but, he is an experienced point guard. He's been in the program for 4 years now, so he should know something. 3 years, I should say. So, they're an interesting team. Again, the competition in the West Coast Conference is not real strong, but we're used to seeing that be the factor. And really, until last year, they hadn't quite broken through. They got to the Elite Eight back in 2015 when they lost to Duke. But just in a year where there are not a lot of great teams in college basketball, you could definitely see a scenario where Gonzaga kind of sneaks in under everybody's radar. They win the West Coast Conference Tournament Final at 11 o'clock at night, tip-off in the East, and no one's really talking about them. They go in the tournament as a 4 or 5 seed, and they end up in San Antonio. Could definitely see that happening.
Seth, tell the people we've got going on this week at the Fieldhouse. Tell the people, just generally, what are we looking forward to? What are we excited about?
Well, we're gearing up. We're starting to think about the tournament and conference tournaments. And for my hoop thoughts this week, I did my drill where I talked to coaches in various leagues, quote them anonymously, scouting teams in their own league, so they were able to speak freely about weaknesses and deficiencies about teams. So kind of starting to gear in for the tournament and see what happens. I mean, we got Eamon's Bubble Watch has been going every Friday. Stuart Mandel does a bracket watch every Tuesday, and a zillion notebooks and stories in between. So lots to cover here down the stretch.
This has been another edition of the Fieldhouse Podcast. Please go subscribe to us over at The Athletic. We would really appreciate you coming to hang out with us for a little while. We'll be back on Thursday with another great installment of the show. Until next time, though, we'll talk soon. Bye.